Welcome to my podcast story, the show where podcasters share the real journey behind their voices, from their first mic check to their biggest milestones. Every episode reveals the lessons, challenges, and breakthrough that shape a podcast star's journey. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and I can't wait for you to hear today's story. In today's episode of my podcast story, we have Demetria Zinga, the CEO and founder of Soul Podcasting Collective and the top 5% global podcast host. Demetria hosts Soul Podcasting, plan, record, and launch a show you believe in, where she guides purpose-driven entrepreneurs through their podcasting journey with both strategy and heart. What makes her story fascinating is her evolution from homeschool mom to full-time podcast coach, building her expertise over 20 years in digital marketing while recording episodes between nap times and lesson plans. She's here to share her inspiring journey of how she created a boutique agency that helps others find their authentic voice, overcome technical hurdles, and build podcasts that truly reflect their purpose. Demetria's approach to blending soul strategy has helped dozens of entrepreneurs transform their message into powerful platforms that connect and convert. Tell us your name and what you do.
So my name is Demetria Zinga, and I am a podcast coach. And currently I run a podcast agency called Soul Podcasting Collective. So my focus is on helping entrepreneurs and even ministries, small businesses and ministries who are interested in starting their podcast to just get started.
Okay.
So I try to help them through audio and video editing and a lot of just helping them out however they need help.
Yeah. How did you get into podcasting?
Wow, that's quite a story. So I started podcasting in 2004, and it's because I found that at the time I was at home. I was a little bit bored. I had just resigned from a job that I did not like, and I was also in graduate school, and I just decided to resign and focus on my studies and develop my web design business at the time. I found a podcast because podcasts were just starting. And so I found one called Work at Home Mom Talk Radio, or WHAM Talk Radio. And I was really intrigued by this idea of, okay, I can take my own things that I'm doing with my website design. And I had also created an online women's ministry magazine. And so I wanted to create audios to help women through like encouragement, through inspiration, scripture. So I was placing these little like audio player buttons on the website. But when I found that it can be turned into an RSS feed, that's where I got the idea that this could be a lot easier if we turn this into an RSS feed and create a podcast so that people don't have to just click the play button for everything. So that's where it started. The podcasting bug hit me really hard, and I created between 2004 and 2012, I did 4 shows. Those have all been Podfaded at this point. And then starting in 2012 until now, I created 4 more. So 8 total over 20 years.
When you say those 4 they Podfaded, what exactly do you mean? Do you mean that you sunsetted them, or you just like, not really mind?
So for Podfading, so what happened was I started shows that I didn't continue. So maybe I got into like 50 episodes, and then I just didn't post anymore because those shows no longer, they didn't hold the same relevance to me as I started moving on in my life, and my interests changed and my life was changing. We moved a few times and just life changes happened. And so I just wasn't interested in keeping up those shows. So that's what I meant by Podfading. But since that point, we started 4 more, and, it's just been a matter of learning how to close different chapters of my life. When I start a podcast, how do I let my audience know, okay, this is it for this show, but there's another one. So stay tuned, right? And so that's what I started to do from that point forward, is just to keep my audience engaged and keep them following my next, my next project if they're still interested in what I'm doing.
Yeah, out of curiosity, those are 4 podcasts that you say. What's the word? Oh yeah. I know as much as you say it's Podfade, I won't exactly say it's Podfade because I feel like Podfade is when you kind of like stop podcasting altogether. But sometimes you might have a podcast that is, oh, it's just this phase. I'm trying to figure out this thing out. Let me just have a podcast, and immediately you're done with that thing. So the podcast is still there, but you're like, okay, we've moved on.
Yeah.
We've completed that project, right? So it's not like, oh, a podcast that
Right.
continues through time. It's more like, oh, it's a project-based podcast. Oh, within like 2, 3 years, we'll do the podcast and then we'll move on. Is the podcast still live? That is, if I should go search for the podcast, will I find it to listen to?
4 of them you will not, but the
Oh,
other 4 you will.
oh,
So I kept the archives of the last half since 2012. So all of those shows are still up, and I'm actually still running 3 of them. One of them I did let my audience know that's it for now. Head over to podcast number 4. So you can find all 4 of those. But the first half of my podcasting journey was just so raw and so just unedited, unfiltered. And I was still growing as a person, still learning who I am and figuring out like what I think about life. And so some of those ideas that I had then, I don't feel the same way. So I just let those audios just go and be what they are. And they're no longer uploaded. I think I was using, I can't even remember the server. I might have been using Libsyn or something, and I no longer host with them. So I lost a good bit of those, but I still have some on my Google Drive just for personal use, but the public doesn't have access to the first 4 shows.
okay.
But if you were to Google my name and look for the names of those shows, you'll probably find it in the Wayback Machine archives.
Yeah.
You might find something. Yeah.
Do some digital investigation, like dig around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You'll run into something.
Currently, how many podcasts are you like running? When I mean running, I know you have a podcasting company, but like hosting, where you're the one who's actually like showing up, talking to the mic.
So how many do I host right now?
Yeah.
So I'm hosting 3.
Okay.
And there is one that have faded out that is still available. People can still listen to the archives of it, but I do 3 shows at the moment.
Okay. Can you tell us what the names of the show?
What they are? Yes, the one that I started in 2012 was for homeschool moms of faith. So that one is called Christian Homeschool Moms Podcast, and that's been running like for about 13 or so years. So it's something that I still contribute to that sector because I feel like I still have something to offer them, even though I no longer am in that space. I no longer homeschool my children, but I was there and I understood the things that homeschool moms go through. And so I just sort of come back as a host, as an advocate for them and to support them.
Yeah.
So that one is Christian Homeschool Moms. And then I also run Her Business Elevated podcast. And that is for the CEO minded, initially woman of faith, but now more broad for just women who are solopreneurs and who are trying to figure out what to do with their big business ideas, but just need a little bit of support getting started mentally, because it can be a mental game to get started with your business. And so I wanted to provide just that kind of like a business coach advocate kind of thing. And you'll see sort of a theme in all of my podcasts. I show up like a coach or someone who is a friend or an advocate, someone who's a support system. And so that's kind of who I'm reaching on Her Business Elevated. So again, women entrepreneurs. And then my main show right now that I'm really putting a lot of focus and energy on is the Soul Podcasting podcast. And that's where I'm exploring helping podcasters or soon to be podcasters or those who are already in the flow but just need a little support with keeping their show going and figuring out the ropes of what it means to podcast from beginning to end and everything in between. So mindset, we talk about creating like your titles and your episode ideas from scratch and like making sure that comes from your soul. The whole idea of soul podcasting, making sure that it's something you really are passionate about when you start your show so that you can keep, making your shows. And initially I'll just go back into, so those are my 3 shows now, but going back into my earlier years, I started a show in 2006 It was called Publish a Podcast. And so this show, Soul Podcasting, that I'm doing now is very similar to that initial podcast I created almost 20 years ago. So very similar. It's just kind of like come right back to the surface where that's just a passion of mine that never went away. Even though I Podfaded Publish a Podcast, I'm still doing that now today with Soul Podcasting. And so I find that a lot of the things that I was interested in years ago that I put on the table or put on the back burner and said, I'll revisit it later, or maybe I'm not interested anymore. I'm right back into it again, doing it again. So it's proof that, the things that are born in our hearts to do, even if we put it on hold for a season of our life, somehow or other, if it's meant for us, it'll come back into our life. It'll come back into our path.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, you do the soul podcasting, Christian Homes School, and then the our business adventure.
Her business elevated.
I feel like you should have a podcast. Call the podcast the Demetria Zinga Show. That podcast will just be about you, like your journey as you evolve. Like, today you're like, oh no, I'm no longer doing this. I'm going to try this. Like, because we're all growing, right? There are these various areas of our life, and for me, I thought I was the only one, but I'm always like, okay, I like this thing. I'd love to start a podcast. And sometimes I'm like,
yeah.
Right now I've created a list where if I think of a podcast idea, I write it down. So because I'm like, I need to start, and it's a lot of work. And I'm like, no, I need to focus on the ones I've started already. I'm like, yeah, I need to start this one.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, focus on this. Okay.
And maybe there'll be a time when you can start those.
Yeah,
shows.
Maybe there will be, but yeah, it's immense work. It's rewarding, but it takes commitments. Yeah.
It really does take commitment.
Yeah.
It does. And that's why I always stress that you have to be passionate about it, because it's not for the faint of heart. Podcasting is something that you have to decide, okay, I'm doing another show next week. I'm doing another episode the week after, and this is part of my life now. And showing up is just that's half of the work, is just to show up, and to show up prepared, to know what your goal is for the show, and then to follow through with it. And you know what you want to talk about, and you start to develop these working episode ideas, and you just show up and do the work. That's the most, the hardest part, I think, for a lot of people is they have the idea, but maybe don't follow through. They just sit on the idea for years. And so that's why I love to see what you're doing, Wisdom, is that you just take it by the reins and do what you need to do to show up. And you're showing up like several times a week, probably every day. I don't know, but it seems like it's a lot of podcasting.
Somebody has been doing their research. It's all right.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel that and you're the podcasting expert, so I have some questions I'll ask you, and my listeners will really gain from it. And I say this because you not just have your podcast, you also help other people with their own podcast. So you get to see a lot of things, and with having your podcast, there's a limit to how much experiments, how much things you can try and see, because having your own show requires a lot of commitment. So you can't just be starting a show every day, every year, because you want to think of, I need to create a really cool concept for this podcast. You already have podcasts, 4 podcasts. You can't do that. But when you have people's podcasts, you're producing, you get to see different ideas. We're like, I want to do this with the podcast. You test run and do all these things. And so you get a wealth of learning from other people's show that you can also get to apply for your show. What I want to ask is, what are the possible reasons possible purpose one could have for a podcast?
The possible purposes for a podcast?
Yeah.
Okay. Reasons why someone would want to start their show, their podcast. I think you would want to start a podcast for a few reasons. You want to educate. You want to make sure that the people that you are talking to, you're teaching them something, you're giving them some information, some tips, tutorials, tools. That's education. Or you want to be an inspiration. You want to inspire people. So you want to motivate them, encourage them. And I think encouragement and inspiration probably go hand in hand. So I'll say to encourage or to educate, but also you might want to just entertain. Some people have fun podcasts where they're practicing their they're comedic art, they're comedians, and they want to practice, and they want to have a place where they just make people laugh and make them happy. So entertainment. But there's also, spirituality. And again, that would come under encouragement and inspiration. So maybe to minister. So for those churches or ministries who are interested in podcasting, to spread the word that they want to spread for their organization or for their spiritual beliefs. There's lots of reasons, but the thing is with podcasting is like, I think anybody can start a show. And I think when you figure out what it is your purpose is for starting that show, it makes it easier for you to get started. There's no gatekeeping in podcasting. It's available to everybody. A child can podcast. Someone over 95 can podcast. Anybody can start a show. And for whatever reason, they feel passionate about it. And so rather than like putting it in a category and saying, okay, I need to figure out if I'm educating, if I'm entertaining, sometimes it's just what's in your heart. Just ask yourself, what do I want to share and why am I passionate about this? And I'll just have to say that I believe podcasting can be very, very therapeutic for those of us who maybe start a podcast because of a hardship and we just want to share our story. Then that's also a reason for starting a show, is to share your story, because there's so many other people out there that are probably going through the same thing and need to hear someone else say it, and to share their story, because that helps them to get through the problems that they're having. So I think podcasting can be an inspiration. It can be healing. It can be helpful in so many ways, rather than just educating or entertaining. It can also be therapeutic in many ways.
Wow. Wow. That's a lot. The reason that I asked that question is a lot of persons, they want to start a podcast. You know how you just see something like, yeah, I want to do this thing, right? And then they
Yeah.
go ahead and they do their research and they look for, oh, the top what, it makes sense that if you want to start something, you look for who are the top persons in this field, right? And then they see those big
Mhm.
guys, right? For some reason they try to copy them, which it's not recommended, because these people, they have their own
Right.
reasons for starting their podcast. And so your
Right.
podcast might be, for example, you want to let's say, become better at speaking. So you, every week you just go to your podcast, you tell your story. That way it helps you to refine the story and write better. And you hope that people will listen, but if they don't listen, it's not really a big deal, right? But
Right.
you start copying the practices that people who have a podcast that is meant to reach 10 million people because they want to make a lot of money. And now you're applying the rules, you're looking at the metrics those people look at, and so you're like, oh, I'm failing, I'm not doing well with the podcast and all that. And whereas the purpose of the podcast is completely different. So you're doing one thing and then you're doing another thing. So
Right.
that's why I was
Right.
like, yeah, let's look at the purpose so people get to know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, because there's a complete misalignment if you're looking at what someone else is doing. Someone who they may already be famous, and so of course they're going to get a million downloads
Yeah.
overnight, right? We can't compare what we're doing with what someone else is doing, and also, everyone has a story, and there's someone out there that needs us, that needs to hear it. Even if it's just one person the whole month that downloaded your episode and listened, you might have saved someone's life.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it's so worth it to just do it's in your heart to do it. Go ahead and do it, because podcasting, there's so many different reasons we can choose to podcast, and it doesn't have to, and it should not be motivated by how many downloads we're getting or how much money we're able to make in this, arena. But if you choose to look at it financially, it's going to be discouraging to a lot of people, because you don't necessarily make money right away.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah.
It's a good thing you mentioned money, because that's the next question I'm about to ask. Does your podcasts with S, emphasis on the S, does your podcasts make money?
Well, at this point in the game, I would say yes, but there are limits on that. So, no, I'm not raking in six figures for my podcasts yet. Maybe one day. But
Okay.
at this point, no, it's really, for me, it's about encouraging people to kind of look at what my business is doing to help them. So I'm really advertising my own services and what my company is doing, and that is my sponsorship. I have had sponsors and affiliates and things like that on other shows. My homeschool podcast, especially, has been a really great outlet for connecting and collabing with education publishers. So on that show, I can do some like additional things that I can't do on Soul Podcasting or that I can't do on Her Business Elevated because I have a longer connection with the homeschool community. So it makes it easier for me to, do sponsorship deals there. But again, that's not, that doesn't necessarily, I wouldn't say that it pays a lot of money and it's not frequent and it's not every month where I have a sponsor. So they do make money, but it's very hit or miss, and it's not something that I would completely rely on from month to month. But it's nice when it happens, right? It's always nice.
Yeah, I'm always surprised when every time I ask my guests, which in this case podcast hosts, if their podcasts make money, the first thing they tell me is, "Oh well, there are no ads, there are no sponsorships, there are no affiliates." And I'm like, okay. And then they tell me that the podcast feeds into the business that they have, and I'm like, okay. So does the business make money? Have you gotten leads from the podcast? They're like, yeah, sure. I was like, okay, so why, okay, why, why don't you consider the podcast as making money? Like, okay, I'll give an example. If I was an affiliate for you, right? And
Mhm.
I bring business deals for you. And if someone was to ask you and call my name and say, does wisdom make you money? Would you say yes or no?
So if you were an affiliate,
Yeah, I bring clients
with
for you, right? And if someone asks
right.
you, does wisdom make you money? Would you say yes or no?
It depends on how we're looking at this because if you are creating like an ad slot for my show, then now you're integrated with the podcast, and then I can say that you purchase an ad space with my show. Then my podcast is making money because you have purchased ad. Um, if so that it kind of, it depends on how you're looking at affiliates and sponsors. That's kind of a different thing as well. So if you wanted me to sponsor, let's say you have a product you wanted me to share with my audience and you paid me to share your product with my audience, then yes, you and your company is helping my company to make money on my podcast. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
There's something you mentioned that I really, really, really want to point out, and it's very important, and I'm glad you mentioned it. It's that for each of your podcasts, the way you approach monetization is quite different depending on the kind of podcast, right? Like for the homeschool podcast, is way
Mhm.
different from your soul podcasting uh, collective because that one has a direct business that you can tie it into. So
Mhm.
having four podcasts, it's easy to say that okay. It's important that most podcasters they know that every podcast is different. A monetization method that might work for one podcast might be a terrible idea for another podcast. It's about finding the one that
Mhm.
works best for the podcast and for you.
Exactly. And each podcast has a very different purpose, a very different audience who will respond differently to certain things that I say on the show and even people I bring onto the show or even collaborations. They may not respond well to like if I try to share a product on my homeschool podcast that I'm doing over at my soul podcasting, it won't work because they're not interested in soul podcasting. So I can't necessarily share that. But what I do, or I can, but I try to do it very gently. Like I'll say, this is what I do. And if you'd like to hear more about it, join me over at soulpodcasting.com or listen to the show. But I never try to make my homeschool audience listen to my podcasting content or try to make them think that it's something that they need to be interested in because that's not where they're there for. They're
Yeah,
there for homeschool content.
yeah,
So yeah.
that's true. I'm curious, right? You have a podcasting business, so even though we're talking about your podcast story, I feel like the podcast business is also part of the pod. So it's a collaboration. It's an ecosystem of things, right? When did you start the
Right.
podcasting? Quick break. Before we continue, I'd love to invite you to join the My Podcast Story newsletter. Each week, I share highlights from our guest stories, behind the scenes podcasting tips, and resources to help you grow your own show. You can sign up at mypodcaststory.com/join. That is mypodcaststory.com/join. Now, let's get back to the episode. Business.
I started, so I'll be honest with you. I've been doing this so long that I have to go back in my brain archives to remember exactly when I started, because my first podcast consultant was, I believe it was in 2006. So it was right when I started that first podcast.
I'd love to hear about that first consultancy.
Yes,
significant.
I started 4, and 2 of them were about podcasting. One was called Publish a Podcast. The other was called Godcast News. And that was about sort of the Christianity, religious aspect of podcasting and ministry. And that's what sort of our local news picked up on that. And so they came over to feature us in a whole story for the newspaper just about that show. But then through that, we started what we call the Internet Radio Podcast Bootcamp. And again, this is still 2006. And then that's where I started picking up clients to help them with their consulting or help them with their podcasting. I would coach them on the phone. We didn't have Zoom. We didn't have webinars. So we were just audio on the phone, and I was walking them through the steps and just telling them what to do. And I can't visualize it because I can't see what they're doing, but they could send me pictures, but everything was so old school and so slow. And that's what we did. I had a little workbook that had pictures of what they're to do to start their show. And I sent that to them, and I sent them a DVD. And so they would pay me to coach them on the phone with how to make a show. And that's where it started. But then I stopped for about 10 years, maybe a little more than that. And then I came back. So way more than 10 years, but I came back in 2023.
Wow.
2023. And that's where I started Impact Podcast Coach. I was just thinking of being one-on-one. We're just going to coach people with their shows. And as of recently, Soul Podcasting Collective was born because I wanted to expand to be more of like an agency and not just only me helping people, but how can we create just like help people with their podcasting through their edits and audios. I know I couldn't do all the edits myself. So that's where my journey sort of landed me over the years. But it's always been a passion since 20 years that I wanted to help people share their voice. And there are so many people that came to me because of the web design business I had. And they wanted to do more than just a website. They wanted to connect with their audience. And so I always recommended a podcast. And that's how those two things integrated, branding and podcasting. It's been a journey.
I feel like the podcast industry, right, as a whole, is a very big pie. Why I'm saying this is that not just as a podcaster, right? There's a lot of opportunities to earn, right, in the podcast industry, whether you're editing the podcast or treating the audio. There's so many things I can't even think of all of them. And probably maybe the reason could be that the people that are podcasting, they have this orientation that podcasting is a long game investment. It's not like, creating a TikTok account. It's not like there's anything wrong with TikTok, but they're not like looking for, I need to go viral now. My video. And of course, getting listens is nice, but it's just different. The people that they have this different mindset that's I'm willing to invest and I'm willing to be in this for the long game. And it's a whole different client.
Very much so. It's people who understand that this is a long-term commitment, that you're not relegated to podcasting forever. If there's ever a time when you just don't want to do it anymore, then you don't have to. But when you do start a show, this is not like starting a TikTok account and posting reels. It's not like a quick turnaround where you're going to get hundreds of views overnight or hundreds of downloads on your audio overnight. This might take a little while, and that's okay though, because we're looking at podcasting differently. Like you said, it's a different clientele. When you're working with people who are really serious about starting a podcast, usually they kind of understand that this is something that I have to commit to see that growth and the longevity of it. But it's definitely something that takes time to grow, but when you look at it in terms of if you're giving a speech or you're giving a keynote speech, right? You might have 50, 100 people in the room,
Yeah.
maybe even less, right? And so if you're giving a speech to that many people, you've made a difference. And so if you're getting 50 downloads a month, you're still making a difference.
Yeah.
You know, you gave a speech, right?
Yeah.
And so I tend to look at it that way so that it doesn't feel discouraging, especially in the beginning stages of building a show. Then after some time it grows and then you just feel so much better because now you're seeing traction, but that can take a little while. So it's just about being patient and sticking with it. And then if you really really don't like the show and or the idea, the beautiful part of it is that not a lot of people have downloaded it. I've downloaded your podcast in the first couple of months usually. And so then you can sort of play with your ideas, you can transition, you can morph your idea into something else and just, play around with your podcast idea until it really suits you. So like if you go back to the beginning of any of my podcasts, you'll see how much I've changed over the years and how even my audience has changed just a little bit. There's been some tweaking along the way. And that's expected because we all grow. We all transition and change. And so who I was when I first started Christian Homeschool Moms, for example, is not who I am today. And same with soul podcasting. It's only been around for 2 years, but I have changed a lot during this journey of podcasting. And so it's a great way to document how you've changed. And then you'll attract different people to your show based on what you're delivering today versus a year or two ago.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for, for expanding on that. Uh, what would you say is like the major growth lever that works for growing podcasts? I mean, you do this for your own podcast and you also do it for clients' podcast.
What is the major
Growth lever, like
you say that more?
like the method of growth. If someone wanted to grow their podcast, what would you like? If you had to recommend just one method to grow their podcast, what would that be?
Oh, metric?
Method.
A mentor?
Method.
Let's see.
Method.
A method. Okay. Um, so for a method for growing your podcast, I think would be I would say stay consistent, but there's so much more to staying consistent. So much more to it. So for growing your show, I think it's really about always keeping your eyes open to what's happening in the world of podcasting because that changes so quickly. And so that's why I love what you're doing because in interviewing people, you're able to just kind of like stay engaged, stay on top of things. And so always keep one eye open on what's happening in the world of podcasting so that we're aware. And then also just being open to uh, hearing what your audience is telling you. And if you feel like there needs to be some changes in your show format or how long you do the show or as far as like the length of the show or like anything else that needs to be shifted, then implement those changes and then tweak as you go and see how that changes things. Maybe more regular podcasting or maybe drop back depending on what you see is happening. Pay close attention to your statistics and see what topics are being downloaded most often and that might be what's most resonating with people. I noticed that one of my shows on Soul Podcasting that people have been really looking for is how to turn audio into video. So that said, I'm seeing that there's more of a tech focus and maybe they want a little bit more how-tos. And so I think, to grow your show, just pay close attention to what your audience needs, but also don't be afraid to share, to get out there on Facebook groups, for example, and take advantage of those days where they ask you to share your business, share your content. And usually a lot of Facebook groups will have once a week where they focus on allowing their members to share their content. So that's a great time to share what you're doing there, share on your own social medias, start an account on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and share your content. And that can help grow your show. Anytime you're interviewing someone, make sure that they share the episode with their audience and then vice versa. So we're just getting more, expansion. We're expanding each other's networks. And so those are just some organic, free ways to grow a show. There's also paid ways to do that, but that's a whole different thing, to pay for ads and things like that. But those are all ways you can just keep growing and keep showing up and seeing your listenership and your downloads grow month after month.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. There's a lot. The space is changing. A lot of AI tools, a lot of automations out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before you sleep and you wake up, you're like, oh, something you can do this with this too. Are there any special AI workflows or tools that you'd recommend for podcasters?
For podcasters. Yes. So I love AI right now. I'm just like, it's very, very helpful, and it has increased my productivity so much where I'm able to now create 3 shows a week or 3 episodes a week on my sole podcasting podcast. So it's just helping. Definitely I'm using all of the like Claude and ChatGPT and a couple of others. I can't remember the other one, but I'm using those 2 to help me with my brain dumping, my ideas, generating topics, making sure I get the proper keywords, and it also helps me with my blog posts. So I create the show outlines, but then I'm using definitely ChatGPT and Claude to help me create my blog posts so that that is part of the ecosystem of my show. I don't just have an episode, but it goes along with the blog, which goes along with the LinkedIn and all the socials. And so there's that. But I also love to use AI for part of what I do in editing. And so there's one that I really like. It's Adobe Podcast, and it helps to clean up the audio. It's just quick and easy. It removes all of the like background noise or static or anything like that. And it just makes it nice and easy. I still have to go into Adobe Audition and do some other cleanup and enhancements, but Adobe Podcasts, the AI will definitely take a lot of the noise and extra static away from an episode. So that's one thing that, like, if you have access to Adobe tools, I think it's just called the Adobe Cloud, all of the software, Premiere, Audition, Adobe Podcast is part of that package, and you can use it to clean up audio.
Yeah, I think we'll just double down on that, and I'll ask you, what's your podcast workflow like? So if you have an idea for an episode, how does it get made, in essence?
Yeah. So I love talking about workflows because, and again, my workflow changes depending on
Yeah,
which podcast we're talking about as well. So, but for, let's see, for soul podcasting, I get ideas because, well, I have a Google Drive folder that is I have a running list of ideas that I've had since, like I said, 2 decades ago, that when I first started my show. So I'm actually going back to some of those original ideas about the basics of podcasting, how-tos, foundational. And from that, I bring that into ChatGPT and ask it to give me additional ideas based on those and based on my goals for the show. So AI kind of already knows what my business is and what I'm trying to do. So it helps me with idea creation. So that's my first step is to get those titles and ideas for shows for the upcoming quarter. So I have a whole bank of ideas. And the other part of my workflow is, in addition to generating ideas, is to make sure that I'm getting people on my show as well. And so I like to stay on Podmatch, which is, I think, how we found each other.
yeah,
And that's where I find my guests. So I'll do 2 solo shows where I have my running ideas, and then I'll have 1 guest per week. And so that's how I start. And then from there, I'm creating outlines, and those outlines don't take very long to do because I really usually try to do 3 to 5 points per show. And then I just move on to um, recording. I have a whole day of just recording episodes when I'm, of course, not when I'm doing interviews, but just like my solo shows, I'll just sit down and record show after show after show after show. And then after that, I'll have a day where I'm editing. So we'll do edits, an edits day. And then we'll do, after we're done with the edits, we'll do episode by episode. We'll upload it and we'll do everything that's part of that process. So for that episode. So that way we kind of stay on track and we get it published or scheduled out to go. So we'll do the reels for that episode. We'll do the blog post. We'll do the images, the YouTube thumbnail, everything that needs to be a part of that one show or episode, I should say. We'll get that scheduled in advance. And then when we're done with that, hands off, move on to the next. And so that's how I'm staying ahead of things for 3 shows right now. And it's been working so far. We even plan out the social media a little bit in advance, just so that's scheduled out to go and I'm not falling too far behind. So we are working on like continuing that workflow. Um, that's what's been working so far. And on the day that it's released, that's when I like to go in and check my socials, make sure it's scheduled out in Instagram and LinkedIn, and then start to communicate with people on socials who's responded to the episode release. I also send out a newsletter about once a week to my list and let them know what's happening and what's been published. Yeah, so it's a lot of technical stuff and hands-on and communicating and corresponding to emails and that kind of thing, but it's all part of the process. And so far it's just been a lot of fun because I had to organize it first and now it just flows. But yeah, that's the main part, is getting organized and saying, okay,
What do you
this is
use
what
for
works for me.
organizing? Like, I mean, you run it 3 podcasts. What do you use for organizing it? Do you use paper or do you have like a software you use for organizing everything?
Yeah. No, I just everything. And so I have 2 places where I do most of my organizing. My brain dump, where I do my ideas and get everything down, is Notion. And I'm just using that just to like get all my ideas down. Notion has been fun because I'm a visual person and just it just kind of works well with the way my brain works. But to truly organize what I do, it's Google Drive all the way. It's files, file folders. Every podcast has its own folder, which is under my business folder and has a hierarchy of what I'm doing under each. So every guest that I interview has their own folder with all of their resources under that as well, their audio assets, their video, and show notes. Everything is there. So even though it's also maybe in a myriad of other different places online, right? It's also on YouTube. It's also, on my hosting, but I like to have access to those things myself and to keep it in my own, so that I own it as well. And it's not just on YouTube or just on my hosting. So I'll keep a copy of it in my Google Drive. So anytime someone asks me, like, do you have any information on the third guest on your show, I can always just pull it up on my Google Drive and it's all there. So I think Google helps me, and Notion. And there's a few other things that I use here and there too, but those are my 2 main ones.
Wow. Wow. Thanks for sharing your workflow.
You're welcome.
Yeah. For the
Yeah.
podcast so far now, I just want us to step back, right? Go way back, back in 2006 when you got your first consulting gig for podcast.
Mhm.
What was how do I explain this now? What was the gig about, and and what I think what was the evidence? What's the word? Yeah, what were you consulted for? Yeah, that's the word.
What was I hired to help them to do?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I did was, so I wanted to help in any way possible with getting them started. So it was mainly a mindset coaching. And initially that's what we did, is we talked about how to get started with their show. And from that point forward, they said they were ready to start their show. And to this day, I believe this person still has a podcast, and it's the same one I helped her with
Wow.
20 years ago, which is amazing.
Wow.
Because I checked on Apple Podcasts and I could see if I can get her permission to share it. She might not be still updating it, but I know as of 2022, he posted something. So I think, yeah, my main thing was just to help them and I had the Internet Radio Podcast Boot Camp. So that was a program where I helped them from like on the phone from start to finish, like just helping them work through the process of like how to create the audio. So I had them install Audacity on their computer, and then I helped them create their scripts. And then it was like a over the course of several days. So it wasn't just a one-time thing, but we had a week of just support. And then we'd hop on the phone and talk about how to, for example, if she had any questions about like how to install Audacity, and then how to record, how to make that first recording, how to do her levels of recording. So I kind of just walked her through that first episode, and I helped her to publish it. I can't remember what the hosting was she used, but we got it uploaded to her host. And from there, I showed her how to get it on iTunes, and that was not an easy feat back in those days. So getting any show on iTunes was a hurdle because it wasn't as easy as just having a podcast host. A lot of times you had to run your RSS feed through a validator, and then that feed had to be validated in order to be accepted into iTunes. And a lot of times it would be rejected because it was not the correct XML language. And so you had to just it was a lot of running around in circles to figure out how to make your feed validated. So they were selling feed validator software, and that's what we had to use in order to get our shows accepted into iTunes.
Wow.
But it was
We definitely have it easy this period compared to back then.
yes, very much so. And then what saved us is when we began to discover blogging as a way to podcast. Then we made that connection. And I just remember like watching other podcasters such as Dave Jackson. And there were a couple of others, Kelly McCausey, in those days who they figured it out. And so I was watching all the big podcasters at the time, and then I said, wait, we no longer have to use an RSS feed validator. So now a blog can serve as our RSS feed because a blog inherently has that syndication ability. So then we figured, well, then all we have to do is connect an audio to a blog post, and voila, you have a podcast.
Wow.
So, and then you have your RSS feed. So we started using the blog as a way to create our podcasts. And so every blog post, we would attach an audio to it, and then we'd send that RSS feed from our blog to iTunes, and that became our podcast. And so we just watched the transition and the evolving of podcasting and how easy it's become. Of course, there were so many broken pieces to podcasting back then. We didn't have necessarily a way to see how many downloads we were getting unless we were checking our blog statistics. And there was just so much that we didn't have. Today, it's so great that you can just choose something like Podbean or Spreaker or Captivate, and it will give you all the information you need, and all you have to do is upload your audios to that host, and it takes care of everything. And immediately you have access to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Amazon Music or whatever you want to submit your podcast to. It will automatically submit it for you. But back then you had to submit everything yourself, platform
Yeah.
by platform. So
Yeah. Well, can you remember back in 2006 what did you charge for the? Because I just want to. I'm curious.
oh my goodness, I don't even remember, but it was
Ooh.
definitely very, very low.
How low
It
are we
was very
talking?
low.
$5?
Um, it wasn't that low, but it was low to the point today where I feel like,
I mean,
I
it's a
could have
long
I could
time.
have
Like
charged a lot
that was
more.
like 19 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I think if I recall the Internet Radio Podcast Bootcamp, I was giving a lot of support over the course of a week. I believe it was maybe 100 or
Okay.
something like that
Okay.
for my time for the week. That should have been an hourly rate. But yeah, that if I remember correctly, it was somewhere around 100 or so.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you are curious to know what that costs now, you can go check out sopodcasting.com and yeah, you talk to the team. Okay. What are some exciting projections or things in the pipeline you're working with for your podcast or yeah, the podcast, the company? I feel like it's just one full ecosystem that's it's just working together that you just love to share with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, I think I just would love to make more connections with people and those who are interested in starting a show, and I would love to be more face to face on Instagram and
Ooh.
on TikTok and these things that I've been ignoring it for a
That's
while
true.
because
That's true. It's a
I,
good thing you mentioned
yeah,
it. I think in TikTok
yeah,
and Instagram, there's something like podcast. It's not podcasting. It's more like co-live where you can invite me. I can invite you on my Instagram, and we could do like say a
yeah,
5 minutes interview or a 10 minutes interview where we just do more like a podcasting Q&A or ask me anything, and people can just bombard
exactly.
questions. You answer, I answer,
Right.
and we'll do it for 5 minutes and 10 minutes, and our followers
Yeah.
can reach combines together. And the sweet thing, we can also repose the content. That's nice. Yeah. I might you might get a
Yep.
DM from
Yep.
me sooner or later. Say, hi, when will you be free? I'd
That
love to
sounds
do a co-live with you. I don't know what they call it on Instagram. I'm not even active there.
That sounds good to me. That sounds good to me. I would love that because that's where I want to hang out more and to be more like accessible and to be more readily available to communicate with people because I realize that in order for people to want to listen to my entire podcast and to even be a part of what I'm doing, they
Yeah.
have to get to know me a little bit more. And
Yeah.
so yes, I have a YouTube channel, but they're not going to watch the
Yeah.
channel necessarily unless they've been introduced to me in some other way. So I think Instagram has been where my people, I guess, hang out as far as like just for quick tidbits. I know LinkedIn is usually where we get like the bulk of our clientele, but like just to have those quick shorts and then repost them to LinkedIn is also a good way to repurpose content. But I feel like doing Instagram, doing TikTok, doing reels and shorts in general adds some credibility to what we do as content creators and to be more accessible to people who might not know what we're doing, but will discover us because we're on those platforms.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think
Well,
that's important.
thanks
Yeah.
for sharing that. For hopefully maybe in the near future. I don't know how near that will be. Maybe 3 6 months from now, we'll have you back on the podcast, and you just say, "Yeah, I did
I'd love
try
that.
the Instagram, and this is how we're doing on Instagram, and this is how much
Yeah.
connection we've been able to." I know we can't exactly measure the amount of connection, but we can just like
That
a
would be
rough
great.
estimate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds wonderful. I would love to do that and even try doing a live sometimes. I've never done that on Instagram
Oh,
yet,
you
so
okay? Okay.
that would be fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if if yeah, you could message me, and I'm like, what do I even?
Yeah.
I'm very used to being a host. That now I'm like, okay, if I was to be a guest, what would I be
I'm sure
doing?
you have so much to share about what you do. I'm
Yeah,
really, really curious, yeah, to find out more about your history in podcasting too. So we'll have to talk more.
yeah. I think for me right
Yeah.
now, the point I am is, I think I've figured and dialed in the consistency part of podcast. The growth and the
Mm,
monetization, those aspects. I work on those parts, but the consistency, showing up and creating content and making it easy. Right,
yeah.
that part I've dialed it in because I create a lot of content, and so I was forced. It wasn't
Yeah.
a thing of choice. It was like, oh, you have to. If not, you'll not be able to create content. And yeah, I have
Right.
some things to share about that.
Awesome. Yeah. Consistency is always something we can use help with.
Yeah,
So
consistency.
that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, thank
Yeah.
you so much, Demetria. It's been an absolute delight chatting with you.
You're so welcome. And thank you for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, I did some digging around. I looked at it and I was like, oh, I saw one of your episodes where you interviewed Dave Jackson. I was like, yeah. And funny thing is that when I interviewed Dave Jackson, because as a rule, right, as a rule, I don't research my guest beforehand. That's just like I just want us to like a stranger meeting for the first time, have a conversation and just
Oh,
talk and see
wow.
where it takes us. That's it. Because I feel like if I do the love interview while the guest is talking, I will not be in the mood. Instead I will be like, I have this question that I want you to answer, and I'm like, nah. So when Dave Jackson came into
Yeah.
one of my podcasts, did not like I didn't even know that he was like the OG of podcasting, and we were talking. I was like,
Yeah.
it was later on. I was like. I later discovered that he had a YouTube channel about podcasting, and I was like, "Whoa, wow, you don't mean it!" And so every time I see him, I hear the I was like, the moment I did the interview, every time, everywhere, I just start seeing his name and hearing his name. I was like, wow, that's nice. That's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. He's been around for ages for
Yeah,
podcasting. And
yeah.
yeah, I think he was the first one that started the school, or
School of Podcasting.
he is the one who started the school of podcasting,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so we were learning a lot from him back in the day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. And for me, it's just the fact that you know, speak being out there, right, gives light to other persons. Like, I mean, there are a lot of persons who would say, "Oh, we were learning a lot from Demetria back in the day." I mean, they're not on the podcast here, but there are a lot of persons that would say that. Yeah, yeah. It just means that, of course, we want to do things, want to make money, we want to get the numbers and the downloads, but it's also important that we
Yeah.
like people can look back and say, yeah, back then when I was struggling with homeschooling and all those things,
Hmm.
she was, her content was really helpful. She really got me through that period. And
Yeah.
yeah, that for me, is really one of those things that I'm like, yeah, I did a good
Yeah,
job.
that's what makes yeah, it makes podcasting worth it. And I think I don't know, I wouldn't change a thing about what we do as podcasters. I think it's just I can't even explain it. Like why would I put all of this time and energy into 2 decades of sharing my life with people that I will never meet. Most of them I'll never meet, right? And why would I do that unless there's something bigger in this, right? There's someone who's being helped and supported, someone whose life is better because I showed up, right? And it is not being arrogant, it's just saying I have value and there's something that, I can give and share with people that obviously they want it because they keep downloading the audios. So, let's keep doing that and seeing how many people we can help. And so I appreciate what you're doing
Thank you, Dimitri.
with your show here and just showing up and letting people share their stories, their
Thank you
podcast
so much.
stories.
It means a lot to
Yeah.
me. Yeah, really, really, really
Yeah.
does. What advice do you have for beginners, people who quote unquote. I know you use the word podfeed a lot of times, and that for me it was kind of surprising because for me the concept I know of podfeed is just quitting podcasting altogether. Well, and so
Mhm.
so when you kept using podfeed, I was like, yeah. But someone who's like struggling, the mindset game and all that, they really like, I want to do podcasting, but I'm not sure if it's. I want to do podcasting, but I'm scared. I'm afraid. Yeah, not. Yeah, don't know.
Yeah.
What advice do you have?
I would just say try it. Just give it a try because obviously you're thinking about doing it. You have toyed with the idea of podcasting. And so it's something you want to do. So give it a try and maybe give yourself, a time frame and say I'm going to do at least 10 episodes. And if it's still something I want to do, I'll keep doing it. And if not, it's okay if you don't want to continue. And that's kind of where I like to use the word pod fading is like sometimes we'll fade it out and start a new show later on, or sometimes we'll not even upload another episode until another year or two later, and then suddenly we're back to the same show that we thought we were done with. So there's some of that. But for those who are wondering how can I get started, just find someone who has been doing it before and ask them a lot of questions and then figure out what tools that are best for you because everybody uses different tools. And maybe it's something that is just easy to get on and record and you don't have to edit anything. Maybe that's how you get started. Whatever your barriers to entry are, find ways, ask someone for support and tell them to help you find ways that you can enter the podcasting space with a very minimal barrier. So if editing is your issue and you don't want to edit, maybe find a way or a tool, a platform you can use that allows you to do very little editing. Or maybe, if the issue is that you're not ready to interview guests, then don't interview guests. Then just go solo and just talk, right, for the first couple of episodes and see how you feel. You don't have to interview people or you don't have to only do solo episodes. Maybe you feel more comfortable interviewing. So find something like this platform, Riverside, that can help you to make that happen. And so I just feel like you can get the help you need because there are so many people willing to. There are a lot of podcast coaches out here now. And so many people want to help with podcasting. And I just encourage you to give it a try. See where it takes you. And if after 10 or so episodes you're not feeling it, it's okay. You tried. But if you are excited about it, I would say keep going. Like, don't stop at 10. Like, keep going. Do 20, do 40, do 50. See how you feel after that, right? Give yourself a time frame. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year, and then reevaluate. And I like to look at life as in quarters. I like to, because it's business, like, so 4 quarters in a year. So reevaluate after your first quarter, second quarter. So every 3 months, take a look back at what you've accomplished and then sit down with a coach or sit down with somebody. Don't just think about it yourself, actually talk it out with someone. And allow those extra set of eyes and extra support that they can give you. Let them help you validate your decision to keep going or to stop, or how you can rearrange your life so that that podcast works for you. So yeah, just try.
Yeah, thank you so much, Demetria. It's been an absolute
Mhm.
delight to chat with you. Where can my listeners
You're
learn more about you and your podcast, your website, your business, and all the amazing things that you do?
right. So you can find everything that I'm working on right now at soulpodcasting.com. All my resources are there. Anything that I do to help you with podcasting. And you can listen to the podcast there as well. It's all found at soulpodcasting.com.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That's it for today's episode of my podcast story. I hope you enjoyed listening to this journey as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. If you found value in today's episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps others discover the show. And don't forget to join the newsletter at mypodcaststory.com/join for more stories and podcasting insights. Until next time, keep telling your story because someone out there needs to hear it.